He came here for the first time in what year was it?
1987.
1987. Now, some of you may not know that the tango here in Argentina went through a long decline in the 60s and 70s, in which it almost died out. Not really, because there were always people keeping it alive in their homes, but there was a long period where the tango, for a number of different reasons, went into a big decline. It came back starting around when the government changed in 1983 to a democratic government. And at that point, lots of people who had danced the tango for years and were great dancers, who had been in the woodwork for years, started to come out again. And at that time, at the time when Daniel came here, things were very, very different than they are now. And I wanted to have you say something about that.
In the late 1980s, there were no tango magazines. There was no place in Argentina that you could find a list of any places to go to dance tango, or the names of any clubs, any advertisements. None of the regular magazines or newspapers ever had any stuff about it. So the tango world was kind of a best-kept secret in Buenos Aires. And there was the tourist district in San Telmo where you could go down and see a tourist show. So there was a kind of group of stage artists who were working in these shows that were distinctly separate from social dancers. The stage artists were not people who particularly social danced. They were mostly from the professional ballet and folk dance world now. So we would go out to these places to dance, and in fact, in this week we're going to go to two of them. Tonight we're going to go to Glorias Argentinas and Mataderos, and next Saturday we're going to have our farewell party at Sunderland, the Bijou Urquiza. And those are two clubs that are very similar now to what I used to experience 10 years ago when I first started to come here. And in fact, the only thing you could find in those days was like the place that we're going to go tonight. And there were very few people that were teaching class. So in those days, I would say that there was literally the amount of people that were under 40 that were dancing the tango were countable. You could know them all, and you could pretty much count on 50% of them or 75% of them being at any given dance that we went to. And we were always a very small minority of the people present. Most of the people present were people of 55 and 55.
That's an unbelievably dramatic change, the way it is now. So at that point, who was it that you learned from?
You get started.
What's that?
I get started just we'll do it.
Well, I started at, I don't see where she is, but Zoraida was one of your main teachers here, and it was in class. It's okay. I started out by falling in love with that woman when I was traveling in Europe in the 1980s as a modern dancer. And Zoraida was also traveling as a modern dancer, and we had a bit of a storybook romance in Europe in those years. And eventually I came to Argentina in pursuit of a woman. And probably while I was here, I asked, what do they dance here? And Zoraida found a friend of hers, and we eventually got taken to this salon in Palermo where there was older people dancing and where there was an older couple, Miguel and Nelly, who were teaching. And in fact, I published a video in the catalog this last year called An Homage to Miguel and Nelly. Miguel died in 1981 without ever having done, 1991, without ever having done a video of any kind. And there was very little film of that couple left. And one of the only pieces of footage really that existed of them, some of the best footage of them, were the lessons that Zoraida and I took in our first 2 weeks in Argentina. So on that video are literally footage of me in my first week dancing tango, and Zoraida in her first week dancing tango with this older couple. And they were spectacular dancers, but I probably would never have learned the Argentine tango other than something that we took on as a hobby. except that the following years, Zoraida and I were in a pretty serious automobile accident. We came back to live at the family home in Vijayanagara, and I spent probably half of the next 2 years living in Argentina. And during the time of recovery from the accident, I decided that I needed a pedestrian, easy walking activity that would be a good therapy for me, and I decided to learn how to dance the social tango.
You were a professional dancer before you ever started tango.
I was a professional dancer for 10 years before I started tango, with a focus on I was a modern dancer, a jazz dancer, and a tap dancer. When I came back to the United States in 1991, and I was trying to find myself again in New York after the experience of getting over this accident, I fully expected to go back to New York and work as either a jazz or a tap dancer and dance tango for my hobby. But in New York, every job for a modern dancer or for a jazz dancer has hundreds of people competing for it. And when I went out to dance tango at the different salons, everywhere I went, people came up to me and asked me to teach them. So with the little amount that I had learned in Argentina, when I left Argentina, I felt like a beginner. But with the little amount that I knew when I showed up in the United States, people wanted me to teach them how to dance. So I kind of feel like I was called into teaching tango, and it was never really a personal decision. Nature, of course, a vacuum, and I filled it that.
So tell us about this, how you used to go to the drawings and you sit there and watch.
Well, I think I told this story a little bit yesterday at the orientation, but you see, the way I look at it is like this. Learning how to dance starts down here at the floor and it ends up there at the ceiling. You start as a beginner and you get good at something. Argentines learn how to dance the tango starting about halfway. They come in about here and then they go up. Why is that? Because they've listened to the music all their lives, even if they don't like it. It's like those of us that don't particularly like Frank Sinatra, but we can sing along with all his songs. They've listened to the music ever since they were little kids. They have aunts and uncles and cousins and fathers and mothers and grandfathers who danced tango and who played music and who knew a lot about the tango. The tango is more than a dance and a music. The tango is a whole state of a culture in the city of Buenos Aires. There's poetry associated with the tango. There's language associated with the tango. The slang of the city has a lot of tango expressions in it. The posture of how the dancers meet each other and how they dance with each other. Even two young kids in Argentina who don't want to dance the tango and who don't know any tango could fake it. Because they can take the position, because they can hold their bodies that way. There's so many things that an Argentine doesn't have to learn about the tango because they already know it. And so what does a student go to a teacher for? A student goes to the teacher to learn the steps. So in Argentina, the teacher's job begins with the steps. So you go to the teacher and you say, well, what's the next step? What's the step I need? And teachers most of them have a series of steps that they teach that get you involved in whatever it is that they are trying to teach you. What I realized learning the tango in Argentina was that was not very helpful. I needed to learn a lot about what was underneath the steps so that I could feel like a tango dancer. And when I went back to the United States and I was asked to teach tango, I realized that I needed to dig into my own experience as a teacher and to try and find other ways to teach this material so that people could learn how to feel like tango dancers before they started to attack the vocabulary of the steps. That's an interesting thing, especially because of something called the basic step, and you're going to get confused by this a lot, so I might as well talk about it a little bit. There are a lot of Argentines who teach a basic step, and they count this basic step. They start out with the man stepping back with his right, he steps side with his left, he walks to the cross, and they count number 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up until where they cross. And then there's a little resolution, 6, 7, 8, and then it all starts over again. And this is called the basic step. That's unfortunate because what it is a poor translation. The Argentines never use the word basic step to describe that step. They use the word salida. The word salida means to go out. That's the sign that's usually over the door where there's an exit. Somewhere over there it'll say salida. In the case of dancing, where we are before we dance is in the chairs and the tables around the dance floor. So where we go out of is we go out of where we're sitting and we go onto the dance floor. So to salir a bailar, to go out to dance, is to go onto the dance floor. You follow the logic of that? And the salida is the step with which a milonguero takes his partner's arms and goes out on the dance floor. So the translation should be that it is the first step in the dance. That's different than it being the basic step, because in fact, it is basic to nothing. It does not provide you with the basic vocabulary from which you then build your technique and your ability to dance. It simply is the conventional first step by which people walk out on the dance floor. So unfortunately, when a large quantity of foreigners became interested in learning the tango, mostly outside of Argentina, and a large contingent of dancers, mostly stage dancers who were not professional teachers, tried to teach people how to do this dance, they translated the salida as the basic step. They counted some version of that and gave numbers to it, which was probably not their idea. It was probably the idea of their foreign students who were trying to figure out what the hell they were doing. And there has now become this kind of reverse chain reaction of all of a sudden almost all of the Argentine tango teaching in this country becoming infected with this rather irrational set of counts that go to a step which should be the first step of social dance, but has now come to be called the basic step of the dance. And that's an example of how teachers who are basically there to help people learn how to dance better when they already know what they want to know are different than teachers who are trying to introduce something to people who don't have the foggiest idea what it is to begin. Another question?
Okay, I've got a question. Well, in addition to studying with Nelly and Miguel, you also just hung around with a lot of the older dancers. And that was for what you told me, that was part of your learning process. And I thought you should say something about that.
Well, actually, what happened was, in those first times that we were here, we decided that we wanted to study the social tango with Miguel and Nelly, and we also knew that there was a stage or a fantasy tango, and the great master teacher of that was Antonio Todaro, and he had a little studio over on Belgrano, where we could go and take lessons in fancy stage choreography. And of course, we didn't have that much time, so we'd be running back and forth, sometimes taking a lesson from each of them in the same day, many lessons during the week with each of these teachers. And in those days, even today, the attitude in Argentina is you come to a teacher and you stay with that teacher until you learn how to dance. It's not good for you to go around to a lot of different teachers because it just makes you bad at everything. And I felt from the beginning that as a foreigner, I needed to have an experience with many different teachers because I really didn't understand what I was looking at. So in this case, I was going to the two top teachers of the two different forms of tango, social and stage. And as I was learning how to dance, I had to remember that when I was here, I couldn't do anything that I'd learned there. And when I was there, I couldn't do anything that I'd learned here. So I basically learned how to dance two different styles of tango at the same time, and I had to keep them in divided parts of my head, because I didn't want to offend either of my teachers by them knowing that I was studying with somebody else. And in fact, it was a very interesting experience. In addition to that, I would go out to the milongas all the time, and I would meet a lot of these older teachers, and I would want to have conversations with them, so I would sit around in the milongas and have conversations with them. I had a lot of time to do that, because as I explained last night, in those days, they would not let me dance on a social dance floor.
Now, was that just you, or was that any kind of people?
That was any kind of thing. They already had a habit from their generation. When they were young people, they would throw somebody out of the dance hall who was young and who didn't know what they were doing and who was crashing into people. And now that they were older people and I was a young person, they were more grandfatherly and grandmotherly about it. They didn't throw me out of the dance hall, but they made me sit back. And that was a frustrating experience in terms of learning how to dance socially, but it was a very valuable experience in terms of the amount of time and attention that I was able to receive from older people who were willing to tell me their stories and tell me what they felt about the dancing. What's that? Well, I had more Spanish than Zoraida had English, and so in our relationship, we conducted our relationship in Spanish. So I would say that I learned very fast, and that I learned to understand faster than I learned how to speak. I still don't speak very well.
Some of the older people spoke, you pretty much understand what they speak.
I've got to tell you a story that he told me in answer to your question. It was a wonderful thing. One of the great dancers of this century here in Argentina was a man named Petrolio, who died a few years ago, and he was a great creator, innovator in the world of the tango, and he, for example, has been credited by a lot of people as having developed the turns that everyone dances in the tango back in the 1940s. And he was really a legendary character, and you told me the story about not too long after you got here.
Well, I met him at a dance in Sin Rumbo in the last year of his life. He was...
Well, actually, it wasn't the last year of his life.
He was close to it.
You know,
oh, right.
He only died like in 95.
Okay, so this was maybe 4 years or 5 years before he died. But he had surgery on his throat, and they had removed some part of his trachea. And in addition to the fact that he was old and that he was a drinker, he was also operated on in his throat, and so he talked in a very, very rough and difficult. It was impossible to understand this man. And his voice just rumbled out of his mouth, and all the words were slurred together. And even people from here couldn't understand him. It was only his friends that could understand him. And I was introduced to this man at Sin Rumbo, I guess it was in his mid-80s at the time. And he talked to me for about 2 hours. I didn't understand a word. But I thoroughly enjoyed sitting with the man and having him talk to me, because I really felt like I met his spirit, like I met his soul. And particularly his incredible enthusiasm and energy and obsession with what he was telling me about, because I can tell that he was telling me about tango. And I guess that's the story to tell.
That was the story. I just like the way he told it to me the first time. He said, here I was, sitting with this legendary character who was sitting at my side, and tears were running down his cheeks. He was telling me the entire story of his life, and here I was, and I couldn't understand one syllable. But that's part of the tango experience. But I just wanted to get into a little of the fact that the tango, when it began to come back in the 1980s, you had a whole category of people like this guy Petrolio who came back and had this rich tradition to pass on. And they were great dancers. And so one of the real inspirations of being here in Argentina is to meet some of the people who are in that category. And that is how Danny set this program up originally, with the focus being on trying to get some of the great older dancers to come and pass on what they know to us while they're still around. So several of those great older dancers are going to be our teachers in this program. So I just wanted you to know that, how we've chosen the teachers for the program. Included in the teachers for the program are some of the great stars of the tango. For example, Eduardo Arcambao, and some of the great younger generation, but some of the older people are in this category of people who danced the tango all their lives and were not professionals, at least until somewhat more recently, but they were people who danced for decades just for the love of dancing. And back in the 40s, which was really the golden age, if you talk to people here who were alive in the 40s, that many times I've heard them say, well, back then, everybody danced the tango. You had to dance the tango if you wanted a girlfriend. You had to dance the tango, and the men would practice for sometimes 6 months or more before they'd ever get on a dance floor, so that when they walked into the dance hall, they already knew what they were doing. And what we want to do is to get some of the older dancers who are going to be our teachers here to tell us their story. And it's a very interesting story. And so one of the things you can be doing is thinking of questions to ask starting tomorrow. We're going to have Rodolfo and Maria, who are two of the older generation. They've been dancing the tango for, 50 years. and they can tell us a lot of the colorful story of this. So this today was just by way of a bit of an introduction to that.
Sure.
You've written about how when you first came, what you saw was the steps of the tango, and then eventually you started to notice the, for example, the close embrace and the relationship in a way more. And I'm wondering if you could talk about what that was like, that process, and this may be odd or may not be something you want to do right now, but if you could show us what that was like.
I don't think that showing you what that was like is going to be possible because it had to do with the observations that I made of other dancers. But what I would say is that in the beginning, I was fascinated with the footwork, and so I would try and learn steps. And I was already a capable jazz dancer and tap dancer, and steps were not a problem. So I very quickly accumulated a vocabulary of 20 or 30 or 40 or 100 steps. And yet every time I go on the dance floor and I start to dance these steps, I would get called aside by some older couple who would tell me that I was not dancing correctly and that I had to sit down and watch until I learned how to dance. So I continued my fascination with the footwork, thinking that if I accumulated enough vocabulary of the steps, I would eventually be able to dance. And what I discovered was that actually, it's kind of silly that I didn't discover it sooner. But finally, I started to ask my girlfriend and my partners that I really enjoy dancing with, who are the men that you like to dance with? And they would point to that one. He had a big belly and he didn't have very much hair on his head. He wore his baggy pants and he didn't have fancy shoes. And they point to that one. He's this big, tall, older guy who didn't seem like very much, and he moved around the dance floor. Nothing happened. On the outside, I couldn't see anything. I realized that they were telling me that all the best dancers were the ones that I never watched. Because they didn't have anything interesting to look at from the outside. And the words that they would use to describe these old milongueros was, he transports me to another dimension. He makes me feel like I'm dancing on clouds. I can close my eyes, I trust him. He makes me feel the music. Those were the expressions that they would use to describe these really good dancers. And I've been busy watching all the people with the flicks and the boleos and the double time steps and a little extra this and a little extra that. So I've been looking at all the fancy decorations of the dancers who are more or less show-offs. They're dancing their fancy decorations just for me, the one who's sitting on the side with their eyes open. Whereas these other guys were dancing the dance for their partners, to make their partners feel good. And that was really when a real shift happened inside of me. And I realized that what I had to learn how to do was I had to learn how to dance for my partner. And that really, the show was for my partner, not for the people who were watching. Now, if I'm able to make my partner feel good, and then I'm also able to show off so that my friend who's sitting on the side, I can wink at my friend, and he knows that I did a fancy step. If I can do that while I'm also winning my partner by making her feel good, then I guess you might say I'm a complete dancer. But I really want to focus first on making my partner feel good, because that's where the show really is. I asked this person to dance, and I'm on. I have to take them around the dance floor, and I have to make them feel good, and hopefully give them the kind of experience where they're going to want to come back and dance with me again. Other questions?
It says there's a significant difference between the way they dance tango in Paris, France,
He's asking about the difference between the tango in Paris and the tango in Buenos Aires, and I think that is a question that I'm not very educated enough in the Parisian tango to answer you.
But I can.
But one thing that I would say about it is that, first of all, your question is a little vague in terms of timing. You have the tango in Paris between 1910 and 1920, when you had all those early European tango crazes. And then you have the Parisian or the European style of dancing tango now, in this day and age, which includes the international or ballroom tango, and the American tango, and the Argentine tango in its various variations. in general, the tango that continued to evolve in Argentina was a tango dance that followed in a more specific and clear way the evolution of Argentine tango music in Argentina. So the dancing evolved with the music, and the styles of dancing evolved with the styles of orchestra. The tango as it is danced in Europe and other places outside of Argentina is a dance that has become a caricature of itself and a theatrical, cabaret, ballroom competition kind of dance that bears less and less resemblance to the music and has less and less of a relationship to social dance culture. How much of the actual steps of the different styles of dancing actually relate to each other is a question that has a different answer depending on which style of dance you're looking at and which teacher is teaching that style.
I just wanted to say one thing as a general historical thing about the tango is that supposedly the tango of Argentina arrived in Europe roughly around 1910, slightly before World War I, and people have said that it arrived in France basically by Argentine sailors. This is one story that has been told a lot of times, that the port of Marseille in France was a place where a lot of Argentine sailors passed through, and the tango came into Europe at about that time. And it became a very big craze in Paris at about the time of World War I. But then following that, it became cut off from its source. In other words, they did not really maintain, the people who danced the tango in Europe did not really maintain any kind of relationship with what was happening in the tango here as far as the dancing. So what came to be known as tango in Europe took on its own life and developed as a separate thing. And it's only been really since the 1980s that the Argentine tango, as it's danced here, has begun to be known throughout the world, and that has been due to various things. Certainly to tango shows from here going abroad, and now to people teaching social tango abroad. But basically, for a lot of years, there was a whole tradition of dancing in Europe that was basically not in communication with Argentina, and it developed into something quite different.
My question was, Daniel, what is your vision? What do you want to make out of this, out of yourself? You're going to stay in Argentina, or you make a big program, end up in New York, or what do you have for your own?
That's a good question. Prior to my experience in the Argentine tango, I was part of and I still am part of a cooperative dance movement in the United States where we were building improvisational social dances throughout the country that were based on a much more freestyle form of partner dancing. And since my involvement with the Argentine tango, I felt that is a wonderful vehicle for helping to promote social dance in communities where people might not be exposed to the kind of dancing that I had previously been associated with. And I would say that fundamentally, my philosophical vision is the following. When we social dance, we come into physical interaction with other people in an area, the dance floor, where we bring the least class differences, racial differences, philosophical differences, political differences. We bring the least of those things to this encounter with other people as the people that they are in a framework of music and dance. It seems to me that at some fundamental level, people who social dance are more likely to form a part of their community, are more likely to involve themselves in other community activities, are more likely to have a more human outlook, less likely to be involved in spending their days watching television, less likely to be alienated from community activities in their society. So in my own small way, I feel like social dancing in general is a good contribution to changing the face of our society away from the isolation and separateness that the world of television and media has fostered, and back into an interconnectedness of people doing things as groups and coming together to enjoy each other as people. And that is a political statement. And that in some way, as we move towards more and more gatherings of people to dance, that that's supportive of more and more gatherings of people to undertake other socially conscious activities. So fundamentally, that's why I dance. Yes?
What is the beginning of tango here? I'm not clear from things I've read and heard and say, what started tango here?
Well, going back past the early part of this century, there are very little written and visual records of the tango. In fact, you might say that the tango music, dance, poetry, all form some part of the Argentine tradition of storytelling, or the pajador, which is the Argentine storytelling. And I feel like of all of the different forms of storytelling, it is in fact dance that is one of the areas in which the passage of material from one generation to another retains a kind of oral tradition kind of character, where the only way really to learn something is to have somebody else teach it to you in person. And what we know of the Argentine tango's roots are that there are American Indian influences from the Indians who lived in this part of the world. There are African influences from the slaves that were brought to the southern part of the southern hemisphere in the 19th century. There are European folk dance influences, and there are native Argentine or criollo or cowboy influences that come from the folk tradition of Argentina itself. And that more than anything, there is the melting pot tradition, like with jazz in the United States, where it wasn't any of these things in particular, but the way in which they all mix together in a rather volatile and sometimes violent and provocative, important city, where there was a lot of movement of people and a lot of movement of goods and a lot of movement of information. We only really start to understand the history of the tango in a detailed way, starting from about the 1920s. Then we have recordings, musical recordings, and we have more accurate information about how the dance evolved. So as far as the tango's early history, there's lots of myth and very little reality. Are there any things that...
Yes, I want to make a couple very, very fast announcements, one of which is tonight we're going to Glorious Argentinas, which is a neighborhood club that's a long way from here. The bus will be leaving at 11, so please be on time for the bus. This is a wonderful place to go tonight, and we don't want to have people missing the bus and have to get there in a taxi, because it'll be much easier to go in the bus.
It's about probably a $15 taxi ride if you miss the bus, and it's pretty far away, and it's easy to get lost. So
how long do we get to stay?
Will the first
make the bus. We'll probably stay until 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. If you decide you want to come home later, the best thing to do will be form little groups of people who want to come home later, hopefully with somebody who speaks Spanish, and bring your maps, and we'll tell you how to.
Another thing is, please eat dinner before we go. Very important. We don't want to have anybody not enjoying being there because they haven't had dinner. Please have dinner before 11 o'clock. Okay, that's it for the moment.
Thank you very much.
So we'll see everybody at 11.